In the vast landscape of spiritual teachings, non-duality stands out with its profound assertion that everything is one, and the notion of a separate self or ego is an illusion. At first glance, this teaching can be both liberating and confusing. It suggests that our individual identities, the I that we associate with, are not real in the ultimate sense. While this idea has a certain allure, it's crucial to examine it critically and understand why dismissing the ego entirely as if it does not exist can be misleading and even detrimental. The concept of the ego as an illusion comes from the idea that our sense of self is constructed from our thoughts, beliefs, and experiences, which are all transient and impermanent. According to non-duality, since these components are not permanent, the self they create must also be an illusion. This is akin to the analogy of a mirage in the desert. The mirage isn't real water, but a trick of light and heat. However, the appearance of the mirage is undeniable and can significantly impact the person experiencing it. Just because something is an illusion doesn't mean it has no effects or should be ignored. To put it simply, if we compare the ego to a mirage, we can see that while the mirage may not be actual water, it is a real experience for the person who sees it. Ignoring the mirage won't change the fact that it appears and can cause very real consequences, like leading someone off course. Similarly, the ego, whether seen as an illusion or not, shapes our thoughts, emotions, and actions. It influences how we interact with the world and with others. To dismiss it as non-existent overlooks the significant role it plays in our daily lives. Moreover, the ego is often criticized for being the source of our suffering, with its attachments, desires, and fears. While it's true that unchecked ego can lead to negative outcomes, it is also a vital part of our human experience. It helps us navigate the world, establish boundaries, and pursue goals. The key is not to deny the ego's existence, but to understand and manage it. Recognizing the ego allows us to see its patterns and tendencies, giving us the power to choose how we respond rather than being controlled by it. Dismissing the ego entirely can lead to a lack of personal responsibility. If we believe that our individual selves are mere illusions, it becomes easy to sidestep accountability for our actions. This perspective can hinder personal growth and the development of meaningful relationships. Acknowledging the ego doesn't mean being bound by it. Instead, it means taking ownership of our actions and striving to evolve beyond its limitations. So, are you ready to dive deep into the aspect of the ego? Because we're going to talk about something that often gets misunderstood in spirituality, the ego. There's a common misconception that because the ego is an illusion, it doesn't exist or isn't important. But just because something is an illusion doesn't mean you can't experience it or that it's useless. Let's dive into this fascinating topic. So, what exactly is the ego? The ego is our sense of self, the I that we identify with. It's the part of us that thinks, I am this, I want that, and I need this. The ego helps us navigate the world by creating a sense of individuality and separation. It's not inherently bad. It's a tool we use to interact with our environment. Now, when we say the ego is an illusion, what do we mean? In spiritual terms, an illusion is something that appears real but is not the ultimate truth. It may be an illusion, but its appearance is still important. The ego creates a sense of separation, making us believe we are isolated beings. However, from a higher perspective, we are all connected. But just because the ego is an illusion doesn't mean it isn't part of our experience. we can still feel its presence and effects in our lives. Think about a dream. When you're dreaming, everything feels real. But when you wake up, you realize it was just a dream. Similarly, the ego feels real in our day-to-day lives. But from a higher spiritual perspective, it's not the ultimate reality. Yet, we still live and navigate through it. The ego isn't something we need to get rid of or ignore. It has a useful role. The ego helps us set boundaries, achieve goals, and understand our desires. It gives us a sense of identity and helps us interact with others. Imagine trying to live without any sense of self. How would you function? The ego is essential for living in the world. There are a lot of misconceptions about the ego in the spiritual community. Some people believe that to be spiritual, you have to completely eliminate the ego. But this isn't true or practical. Trying to deny or destroy the ego can lead to more inner conflict. Instead, we need to understand and integrate the ego into our spiritual practice. When we fight the ego, we give it more power. The more you resist something, the stronger it becomes. This resistance creates a battle within, which can be exhausting and counterproductive. Instead of waging war on the ego, we should aim to understand its role and work with it in harmony. Embracing the ego means recognizing its presence and role in our lives. It's about understanding that the ego is part of our human experience. By acknowledging the ego, we can work with it rather than against it. This approach leads to a more balanced and harmonious spiritual journey. Embracing the ego doesn't mean indulging its every whim. It means seeing it clearly, understanding its fears and desires, and guiding it with wisdom. It's like parenting a child. You don't ignore the child's needs or let them run wild. You guide them with love and boundaries. Here are some practical steps to work with your ego. Notice when your ego is in control. What triggers it? How does it react? Keep a journal of these observations to understand its patterns better. Accept that the ego is part of you. Don't judge or criticize yourself for having an ego. Remember, it's a tool for navigating the world, not an enemy. Practice mindfulness to stay present. This helps you observe the ego without getting caught up in its drama. Mindfulness creates a space where you can choose your responses rather than reacting automatically. Ask yourself, who am I beyond my ego? This can help you connect with your true self. Regularly questioning your identity helps you see beyond the ego's limited perspective. Be compassionate towards yourself and others. Recognize that everyone has an ego and is on their own journey. Compassion softens the ego's edges and opens the heart to deeper connections. The ego is an important part of our spiritual journey. It's not something to be eradicated or ignored, but understood and integrated. By embracing the ego, we can find balance and live more authentically. Remember, the ego may be an illusion, but it's an illusion that we experience. Let's work with it, not against it, and use it to enhance our spiritual growth. Thank you all for being here today. Remember, the journey to non-duality and spiritual awakening is a beautiful one. Keep observing, keep surrendering, and keep growing. May your path be filled with light and clarity.